Welcome to part 2 in the social psychology videos. Before I get started on the part 2, while my stuff was uploading and processing and all of that, I did want to say one thing about the content that I ended part 1 with. Whenever I made the statement about the next time something like this happens and you see the dialogue about it on the news, to look through the anger and to realize people are enacting this just world hypothesis, the just world attribution error. I was not trying to at all imply that anger is not a valid emotion. There are a lot of atrocities in our world, in our country, that anger is the right thing to feel, that we should be angry about injustice. So I wasn't saying, oh, be analytical and rational instead of angry. Like, anger is fine. I just wanted to point out, a lot of times when you see people, especially people in the media, trying to defend things that you look at and you think, how are you possibly even trying to find a defense for this? If you look underneath some of it, what you will see is traces of the just world hypothesis. And that's the overarching point that I was trying to get at. So I didn't want to leave anybody with the wrong impression of what it was I was trying to say. So we will get into part 2 with the discussion of attitudes, persuasion, and cognitive dissonance. If my clicker will work. There we go. So attitudes and persuasion. An attitude is your evaluation of a person, a situation, an idea, or an object. And this has 3 distinct layers to it that we're going to get into in just a minute. A persuasion is the process of changing someone's attitude. And this will come through some sort of communication or messaging. Okay? So the attitude is the evaluation, and the persuasion is the process of trying to change an attitude. So attitudes have, move this up here, attitudes have a cognitive, an affective or an emotional, and a behavioral component. And the best way to do this is through an example, right? So an attitude would be, I have a negative attitude towards single-use plastics, right? Plastic bags, Ziploc bags, straws, disposable water bottles, right? Negative attitudes towards single-use plastics. There are cognitive elements to this. There are beliefs, thoughts, and ideas that I have about that hopefully are grounded in fact, right? Single-use plastics account for a great deal of pollution. They're harmful to wildlife. If you heat food up in the wrong type of plastic container, you can actually get chemicals that are bad for your body, right? So the first part of an attitude is those cognitive components that are your beliefs and your thoughts and ideas about that attitude object. The affective emotional are the feelings and emotions related to that. The best example of that, look how sad this is that this baby seal has a plastic bag stuck around his neck. Look how sad it is that this little otter is trying to untangle his foot from a plastic bag, right? These are the emotional things. These are the feelings and emotions that I have about the attitude object. This is gross. This is disgusting. This is irresponsible. This is sad, okay? The behavioral components are the predisposition to act in a particular way as a result of those attitudes and cognitions. I use reusable grocery bags and I buy stainless steel reusable water bottles so I don't have to use those little like plastic Dasani ones, right? I am shaping my behaviors from my cognitions and my affect. Now here's the thing though. Behavior is not always consistent with the other parts of attitude. So what happens when my behaviors don't line up with my cognitive and affective parts of my attitude? That is where cognitive dissonance comes in. Cognitive dissonance is a fascinating area of study in social psychology. This is basically saying if I have inconsistent attitudes, or if my behaviors don't line up with my attitudes or my cognitions, I'm going to have mental, emotional discomfort. So I will either have to change my behavior, I'll have to change my attitudes, or I'll have to be creative and come up with some loopholes and justifications in my attitudes to try to get rid of this stress and this guilt. The big study that uncovered this theory was done by Fessinger. It was done in 1957. And it basically had to do with bribing people to lie. You can get on and you can read the study. It's really interesting. But long story short, there was a group of college students that were told to do something super boring. And then they were instructed to tell the next group of students that it had been really interesting. Some of them were bribed to do it, and some of them were some of them were given a bigger bribe than others. Some of them were given like $1, some of them were given $20. The ones who were given the big bribe had no problem saying, yeah, this was really boring. I only said it was interesting because I was paid to do it. That there's no inconsistency there. I had justification to it. The ones that were given $1 actually rated the boring task as not being that bad and being halfway interesting, because $1 was not enough to justify being dishonest. So they looked for loopholes or justifications in their attitude that, well, you know, it might have been boring, but it was kind of a nice break. I could have been having to sit and take a quiz somewhere. So like they made it their own report of it. They more lined up with the lie that they were asked to tell. So the idea is, if your behaviors don't match your attitudes, you're either going to change your behavior, you're going to change your attitude, or you're going to come up with some sort of loophole where they both can coexist. So like with me hating single-use plastics, and that is a valid example. I'm a little bit of a tree hugger. I don't like plastic. I try to bring reusable shopping bags to the store. If I forget my reusable shopping bags and have to use regular plastic bags and come home and watch myself throw 11 grocery bags in the trash can, I have 2 kids. I buy a lot of groceries. I have ways to ease that cognitive dissonance. You know, I say, well, I always take my reusable water bottle and I use reusable containers instead of Ziploc bags. And so I'm creating less plastic waste than the average person. So every once in a while that this is not a problem, right? I find that loophole or that justification. So there's no cognitive discomfort. Or I change my behaviors, right? If I feel really guilty about it, I say, okay, next time before I leave the house, I am double checking that I have my reusable grocery bags with me so I don't have to use the ones at the store. Okay. It's a lighthearted example, but it's that idea that if your behavior doesn't match your attitude, you're going to have to do something to ease that emotional, that mental discomfort that will come as a result. The next thing we're going to talk about is conformity, compliance, and obedience. A lot of times we use these terms interchangeably, but they're not actually interchangeable. In social psychology, they are 3 very distinct things. Conformity is when you change or modify your behaviors, attitudes, beliefs, or opinions to match those of others. In other words, you're going along with what other people believe. The most interesting example of this, the example where this originally came from, is the Asch line experiment. The Asch line experiment, all right, imagine we have this class in person and you walk in and I have these lines drawn on the board. And I tell you, all right, I'm going to go around the room and I want everybody to tell me which of these lines on the right is closest in length to this line on the left. This is not a hard task. This is not a mentally taxing challenge. Most people have a good enough visual perception they can get this right. Doing it as a control, there was less than 1% of error. Okay. Imagine you come into my class. I tell you to do this. You are the last person that I call on. Unbeknownst to you, I've sent out an email to every single person in the class other than you saying, no matter how I draw these lines, your answer is A. You have to say A, right? So we're going around the room and everyone's saying A, and you're sitting here looking at this thinking, I either didn't understand the instructions or I'm having a stroke or something. So I get to you and you say, most people said A. In repeated trials, they found that 75% of participants gave the wrong answer at least once. Whenever they were the only, whenever everybody else had been staged to give the wrong answer first. So we can form 2 groups. One of the really interesting caveats of this was when they had one other person in the room who was assigned to give the real answer, right? So I call on you as number 12, and maybe let's say I told number 3, give the right answer. Everyone else is supposed to say A, you say the right thing. Having just that one other person who is giving the true answer reduced this to only 5% of people in those trials gave the wrong answer. So having just one ally can protect against conformity a lot. But without that one ally being the lone duck in a group, most people at least once will conform. So why does this happen? There's three big things. The first one is normative social influence. And that's basically, I want to fit in. I want to be accepted. I don't want to be the odd one out. Maybe I know good and well the right answer isn't A, but I'm not going to be the weird one that says something else. The other one is informational social influence. You think that the group has some information or knowledge that you don't have. So you're going to conform because you assume they're correct. So this would be the person be sitting there thinking, I must have misunderstood the instructions and everybody else heard it right. They must know something that I don't know. So I'm going to go along with that. A good example of this would be, which fork do you use at a fancy restaurant, right? Have you ever been to one of those fancy dinners where there's just an obscene number of forks at your place setting and give me a good taco or a good curry and I'm happy. I don't do fancy restaurants. So I know this experience very well, right? And you're sitting there and you're looking at like 12 forks thinking, I don't know which of these to pick up. So what do? You look around the table and you look for what fork everyone else is picking up and you copy that behavior. You assume the other people sitting at this table probably know which one of these forks I'm supposed to use for my salad versus my appetizer versus my whatever else, right? So normative social influence is, I don't want to fit in. I don't want to be the person that sticks out. Informational social influence is, I assume that other people know something that I don't. So I'm just going to go along with it. The third type is called the self-categorization theory. And this is also referred to sometimes as the referent informational influence. This is the idea that when we have in-group members, we desire to fit into our in-group, right? I assume I'm like the people in my group. And so I'm going to adopt the norms, beliefs, and behaviors in that group, right? Have you ever been in a situation where maybe a friend group or a social circle or a study group or something else, and you find out that you're the only one who disagrees with everybody else about a topic? It can be really uncomfortable, right? So this idea is, if I find out that I'm the only one that disagrees in a group that's important to me, I'm going to skip down to the last point. Here's a key part of this. Your social identity in that group must be important to you for this to work. It has to be a salient identity, right? If you could care less that you're the only person at Thanksgiving dinner that disagrees with your family, then it's not that important. So this has to be a social identity that's important to you for this to work. But so you're desiring to be like those in your in-group. You're also desiring to distance yourself from the norms, beliefs, and behaviors of out-group members. Have you ever reevaluated an idea that you had because somebody compared it to an idea of a group you don't agree with? Right? That's the same idea. I'm not a part of that group. I don't like that group. So I don't want any of my thinking to line up with their thinking. If they agree with me, I should probably reconsider this thought, right? So this is the idea of self-categorization theory. So conformity is changing your ideas to go along with the group. And that's very different than compliance and obedience. Compliance is engaging in a behavior or changing a behavior at the request or direction of another person or group. The important element of this is it cannot be a command or an order, right? This is not somebody with authority who's telling you to change behavior. It's somebody who's just a general person. And obedience is where we will pick up on video 3. And obedience is behavior in response to a command by an authority figure. I don't agree with this. I don't want to do this, but somebody in charge of me told me that I should. So I'm going to do it anyway. And we will pick up video 3 discussing the Milgram experience, the Milgram experiment, and why that's a perfect example of obedience.